Okay, good morning. I'm here in Fargo, North Dakota at 10 o'clock, and I guess you'll be seeing this in a couple days' time, so I hope it looks well. I'm sorry I'm not there. I was hoping to have been there, but I just have too complicated of a schedule. But we have a nice presentation for you, and hopefully it'll cover the topics you want to be covering. I'm going to cover a brief review of the wheat market, durum, quality, the current status, and some of the market outlook issues. Just briefly, the world wheat market's been crashing really since about 2010, and more recently since 2012. It seems as though we've fallen in market values from probably $500 or $600 a ton now to probably about $250 a ton worldwide. That is prompted by the excessive supplies that have been accumulated in the world wheat market in general and in other commodities, particularly corn as well. In the current year, 2017, we're expecting another large crop, albeit it'll be smaller than last year, but nevertheless, we'll still be maintaining fairly large stocks in the world wheat market. This shows a picture on the top of the current wheat market at the CME. You can see their values peaked in about middle of February this year, and since they've been falling. And beginning around early May of this year, because of some developments in the hard wheat market in this country, we've had a bit of a rally, concerned about the availability of supply at HRW and protein levels in that crop. The right-hand lower graph shows the decline in prices since 2010 in the world wheat market. This is the MATIF, and I know you're closer to the MATIF, and I think it probably speaks for itself, but again, we had peaked values in about middle of February, then they fell till about early May, and even in your market there as well, they've been escalating since about the last week in April, more or less. One of the important drivers to the hard wheat market in America is the protein premiums, or the basis values for different protein levels. This is a complicated chart, but it shows the details of the protein premiums for many crop years at the Minneapolis market. And you can see that it's a big mess, that it's highly volatile from one crop year to the next. In 2017, that's the red line you'll see. You can see that typically speaking, those are slightly less than average by historical standards. However, the past week, they've jumped up quite sharply. You can see it just slightly there, but that's in part response to the perceived reduced supply of winter wheat in Kansas, the snowstorm that occurred in winter wheat in western Kansas, and the expectation the supply of protein will be lower in the coming year for hardwood winter wheat, which will increase the demand for hardwood spring wheat protein premiums. As we look at the winter wheat market and planting in particular, I think it's important for you to be aware, and I'm sure you are because you've heard me speak before, that we've had a longer-term shift away from wheat in general in this country and from durum wheat in particular. That's especially true in North Dakota, where I live and profess. And probably that's driven by a number of factors. Most important is the escalation in the planting of biotech crops, including corn, soybeans, and canola. For perspective, in North Dakota, prior to biotech canola, we had 0 acres or 0 plantings of canola. Now we've at about 2 million acres, and it's exactly in the geographic region where durum wheat is being produced. The second contributing factor is risk, in that durum wheat in particular and hard wheats in general are more risky crops to produce, and the risk management mechanisms are not as efficient as exist in the biotech crops. And that's a very important factor that's driving these shifts. Then the last point is the quality of the durum wheat crop in 2016 was generally not so favorable due to the word scab or fusarium, which was a big problem in 2016, and I'll elaborate on that later. This shows the longer-term acres from 1984 going from about 52 million acres down to about 32 million acres. In reality, we've been declining for many years, since at least the 1950s. This coming crop year, we will have the lowest plantings in over 100 years of wheat in America, and the USDA baseline projection has it at about 48 million acres, which will be record low for at least the next 10 years. So that's a very important shift in this marketplace, and it's due to the availability of more profitable crops, more profitable and less risky crops. This shows where durum is produced in North America. You can see the dominance of Canada, in particular the southern half of Saskatchewan, particularly the southeastern part of Saskatchewan, the eastern part of Alberta, or southeastern part of Alberta, the northwestern part of North Dakota, and the northeastern part of Montana. Those are the primary producing regions in North America. And one of the important things I think is for you to realize is the changing productivity of durum versus hard wheat and other crops as well. This graph here shows the ratio of yields for durum wheat to spring wheat. So those green geographic regions are regions of Saskatchewan whereby the yields of durum wheat exceed the yields of spring wheat. Consequently, at equal prices, there would be a big shift towards producing durum wheat, everything else being the same. Whereas in North Dakota, excepting the extreme southwestern part of North Dakota where it's light green, in all of the other regions, the yields of spring wheat far exceed those now of durum wheat. This is a new phenomenon. Prior to maybe 10 years ago, that was not the case. And that's why we've had this shift away from durum into spring wheats and or other crops, and particularly canola, in the case of both Canada and the northern part of North Dakota. At the current crop year, we're just less than about 50% planted in America. That's the green bar you can see there on May 7th. I'm guessing when it's announced tomorrow, we will be caught up. However, I guess in practice, as I talk to people in the industry, we're probably a bit late as of mid-May. Not urgent because we can plant so much at one time. We can't tell it by these statistics, but in the northern part of the state, it seems as though we're a bit late. This shows the crop production cycle as it'll be reported by USDA in the coming months. Nothing's reported yet for 2017 because the crop year just began, but as it ensues, we'll be able to update these data. These are the current planting conditions for precipitation, and the upper part is for the United States, and you can see that big brown area in North Dakota. That's basically suggesting that moisture conditions or precipitation conditions are about 50% of normal. So there's a bit of, now that's a very important durum producing area. It's not critical at this instant because a lot can change, but at the moment it's a bit drier than normal. Whereas in Saskatchewan, in the lower part of the figure, you can see the weather conditions are about normal for weather precipitation in that region of North America. Very important in the world durum market is what goes on in North Africa. In 2016-17, this is all wheat production. You can see that in 2016-17, there was a sharp reduction in production in North Africa, particularly that in Morocco. You can see actually that was the lowest produced in many, many years. And looking forward to 2017, that's expected to resume a more normal production pattern. This shows the most recent estimates from the IGC, and I point out to you the major exporters will all be reducing plantings or production in the coming year, led by Canada, followed by the United States, whereas that in Algeria and North Africa in general are expected to be increasing production, and especially important is that of Morocco, which is a large producer, and it's expected to resume their production substantially. These are the world wheat prices, including durum in particular, is reported by the IGC. U.S. values have fallen from about $315 a ton to $277 a ton. Other values are all slightly less than would have been the case last fall. These are durum prices as reported in the United States. The upper figure shows the nearby prices of durum at the U.S. Gulf and the Great Lakes, as well as hard-red spring wheat 14% protein, which is the blue line. So you can see all of these values have been falling since about 2012, and they continue to be falling even in the past couple of weeks. In the lower figure, you can see the change in prices at the U.S. Gulf and Great Lakes for hard amber durum. Again, that green line is the most vivid market, where it's fallen from about $310 a ton to about $275 a ton. This chart here shows the U.S. domestic price of durum in the upper figure, shows it at about $300 a ton at the moment, and it also shows in the lower part that that's showing an average spread relative to hard red spring wheat of about $100 a ton, or just less than $100 a ton. By historical standards, that's quite high. This shows the planting in Canada for many, many years, and I'll highlight 2017 in particular, but we've had an important shifting in the structure of planting, and that relates to what I referred to earlier, where we're shifting to other crops. In the current crop year, given the current spread in the marketplace, we should be expecting plantings in Canada about 6.5 million acres. However, the recent announcement suggests it's going to be more like 5 million acres. So that kind of suggests a structural shift in the supply relationship. This shows the same thing in the United States. Given current price spreads, we would expect a planting in the area of about 4 million acres. However, in reality, this coming year we'll be planting about half of that, or about 2 million acres, again due to the shift to other crops. This shows the history of planting in the United States and Canada. The United States is gravitating for the last 3 years to about 2 million acres. My guess would be that's geographically in the region of North Dakota and Montana where durum has an advantage relative to spring wheat. Northwestern North Dakota, northeastern Montana, southwestern North Dakota. Canada had a pretty high peak in 2016, and due to that, supplies in that country, the plantings are expected to fall to about 4.9 million acres. These are yields. They're projected to fall compared to last year and be about equal in the two countries. As we look into 2017, it seems as though we've gravitated to an equilibrium of about 2 million acres in the United States. 2016, early projections were for substantial increases, but in reality, the crop moderated. 2017 would be about 2 million acres. Canada will be about 4.9 million acres in 2017. This shows details of the planting conditions in the United States and in Canada. I'm not going to review these, but you'll have it in your record for distribution. This shows the graphic of supply and demand for North American durum. Looking forward to 2017, the amber colored line at the bottom, you'll see a projected increase in ending stocks. So that's a pretty important phenomena driving the market values, which I'll speak to in a moment. Here's our projected stock use ratio for 2017, which we think has a big impact on market values. They're expected to increase sharply, but in fairness to the audience, it's really hard to sit here in May of 2017 and make projections as to what the stocks will be at the end of July 2018. So there's a lot of things built into this, but generally speaking, due to the situation in North Africa and the supply situation with large stocks, it's expected they'll be increasing this coming year. Carlos asked me to speak about quality, and I think it's very relevant that I do that, so let me speak to each of these. In the United States, this shows our quality characteristics of the 2016 crop compared to preceding years, and you can see that generally speaking, we were about normal. Our protein level was about the same as average. Our damaged kernels was relatively small. A falling number was fairly high at 400. However, we had an emerging DON problem, or fusarium problem, and this shows the weekly projections of quality in the United States. This is the last statement there. A friend of mine did this, and he says, the overall crop graded number 1 HAD, which was similar to last year, but DON has been found in samples grown in the northern region of the United States, North Dakota. This shows a graphic of the history of number 1 and number 2 hard amber durum. You can see that it's down slightly versus the preceding year. In Canada, on the right-hand graph, this is the distribution of supplies. And this is a real big problem in North American durums this past year, because what it shows is that only 24% of the Canadian crop graded as number 1 or number 2. And 76% graded less than number 2, which is drastic by historical standards. As you can see on this graphic, you can see the far right hand, the yellow and blue line for 2016, shows about less than 20% of the crop grading number 1 and number 2, whereas more typically it's about 60% of the crop. So there was a big shortage of number 1s and number 2s in North America this last crop year. So we have a disease in the United States, sometimes called DON, sometimes called fusarium, and sometimes called scab, all used interchangeably. In reality, it's a problem in North America, it's a problem around the world, it's a problem in Europe, it's a problem in Russia and Argentina. And I'm doing quite a bit of work in this, so I'll just share a few thoughts with you on this. It's important for you to understand that we measure DON differently in the United States than in the European Union. You measure DON on the underlying wheat commodity, and those values are 1.75 in the case of durum. In the United States, we treat that differently. The Food and Drug Administration, number one, applies this as an advisory limit. Number two, they apply it to the finished product, in this case flour, not wheat. And the target for most wheat is 2 parts per million, with the idea that through the milling process and or marketing process, they can manage the DON problem fairly effectively so long as the product has less than 2 parts in the wheat commodity. It's a very important difference between the United States and Italy, in particular, and EU in general. In North Dakota last year, in North America, these are some statistics I'll share with you. On the left-hand side, the average DON in North Dakota and Montana combined has fallen from 2.1 to 0.8. In 2016, it was 1.0. In North Dakota in 2016, the average was 1.5. Now, that means the average is 1.5 and the target is 2. That probably means about 30 or 40% of the crop exceeded the limit that was pretty important. Canada was very similar. So this is from a student of mine who's one of the major buyers at durum, and here's his quote. He said, "This is not a fun crop this year. We've had another problem with vomitoxin in durum ranging from 1 to 10 parts. This was last September." So I showed to you here his market values in dollars per bushel and in the table in dollars per metric ton. So this is a central part of North Dakota. The highest quality durum was sold at $230 a ton. If it had 1 part vomitoxin, it was $217. If it had 2 parts vomitoxin and 75 color, it was $175. If it had 3 parts vomitoxin, it was $156 a ton. So that's about a $73 a ton discount relative to the top choice market. So he quoted here, "The market is scrambling right now and there is vom in durum where they have never had vomitoxin before." So it's a very concerning problem for the industry. So just the last couple of slides, this is the way we view the market, and it shows a relationship between prices of the commodity. This is in dollars per bushel and dollars per ton at Minneapolis. And on the on the horizontal axis is the North American stocks of durum. We call it the ending stocks value. And in my work, it's very evident that we've had a shift in this stock price relationship over time. And it's illustrated by these 2 graphics here. And I'm guessing my interpretation here is the market's responding to the change in the structure of the underlying marketplace. And so looking at 2016-17, we can see that's that yellow bar there, that we had about 88 million bushels, which would suggest a market value about $400 a metric ton. In 2017, we're going to be having ending stocks values probably around 150 million bushels, which is probably going to shove the price down to about $294 a ton, down slightly from current market values. Carlos asked me to make a few comments on how does the industry deal with these quality problems. And so just briefly, I'll say this, that the durum milling and pasta industry is highly vertically non-integrated in North America. The milling, semolina manufacturing, and pasta industry is highly integrated, but they're not integrated back into the procurement except in one company. So instead, what most buyers do is they work very closely with their suppliers or traders, and in so doing, they monitor quality on a routine basis, they monitor prices and availability. They do pre-harvest targeting, whereas prior to harvest, they'll be targeting where they want to be doing their procurements. Then they'll do post-harvest selections to determine what are the targeted origins. So during the harvest period, they'll be taking samples and doing selected testing for DON and other characteristics to find out where the acceptable and best quality is, working with their suppliers to make those procurement decisions. That's a brief synopsis of it. So in summary, durum production had been increasing, but now we've had improved production in Morocco and North Africa, and reduced plantings in the United States, and as well as in Canada. In North America in 2016, we had very poor quality, both on grade factors in Canada and DON in the United States and Canada. We had abnormally high premiums for durum wheat versus hard wheat for a given level of stocks during the 2016 market crop year. Nowadays, I think U.S. values are falling. Looking forward in 2017, we have a sharp decrease in Canada production. U.S. will be probably unchanged, and it seems as though we're having a structural change in the pricing relationship versus stocks that occurred probably about after 2007, which has important implications for the overall industry. So with that, Carlos, I'll close, and I'll just beg your audience, if they do have specific questions of me, they can send me an email. Certainly, I'd be happy to respond to it. Thank you.